Varco 7 was a world swallowed by darkness, a planet where no sun ever rose, where shadows stretched endlessly, and bioluminescent fungi pulsed with eerie, ghostly light. The air was thick, damp, and filled with the scent of metallic minerals that twisted through the underground tunnels. This was the home of the Varkari, a race of nocturnal hunters who had ruled the abyss for centuries. They had never known fear, for they had never encountered a creature that could match them in the dark. Their eyes saw through the blackness as easily as other species saw in daylight, and their senses were sharpened to detect the slightest movement. The night was theirs, and they believed no species could challenge them in their own domain. Then the humans arrived. At first, the Varkari watched the human explorers with amusement. They stumbled through the darkness, their helmets casting beams of artificial light, their eyes struggling to adjust. The Varkari whispered among themselves, their laughter a series of clicking sounds that echoed through the endless caverns. They had seen many species try to navigate their world, and all had failed. Fear was inevitable for creatures who depended on light. And so, the Varkari decided to play their favorite game, the ritual of the eclipse. It was a simple challenge, one meant to remind outsiders of their inferiority. The rules were clear. The humans would be given a head start, a chance to escape into the abyss, and then the Varkari would hunt them down. It was a game the aliens had never lost, and they expected this time to be no different. The humans, however, did not react as expected. They did not hesitate. They did not protest. They simply nodded and said, "We accept." The hunt began in absolute silence. The Varkari moved through the tunnels with practiced ease, their long limbs making no sound as they slithered through the black corridors. They spread out, sensing every vibration, listening for the panicked breaths of their prey. But something was wrong. The humans were nowhere to be found. The aliens sharpened their senses, waiting for the inevitable sound of stumbling footsteps or whispered voices. Instead, there was nothing. No movement. No fear. Only an unnatural stillness that sent a ripple of unease through the hunters. Then the first scream echoed through the cavern, a sharp, guttural cry from one of their own. The Varkari turned toward the sound, their eyes scanning the darkness. But they saw nothing. One of their warriors was simply gone. Panic began to spread as more Varkari vanished. There was no warning, no struggle, just a brief moment of realization before another hunter disappeared into the void. The aliens, who had never felt fear in their own world, now felt the cold grip of something unfamiliar. They whispered among themselves, trying to make sense of the impossible. How could the humans, creatures who needed light, move so effortlessly in the dark? Then they heard it. A voice, low and steady, coming from the shadows. "You think we fear the dark. We were born in it. We hunted in it before we even had fire." The words sent a chill through the Varkari ranks. The hunters had become the hunted. Desperation took hold as the remaining Varkari attempted to regroup, but the darkness was no longer their ally. Every tactic they had perfected over generations was being used against them. The humans did not move blindly. They navigated the void with terrifying precision, their movements calculated and silent. They used thermal imaging, sound manipulation, and tactics that the Varkari had never encountered. The aliens had always believed that only their kind could master the night, but the humans had evolved with an entirely different relationship to darkness. They were predators, just like the Varkari, but far more dangerous. One by one, the hunters fell, until only a handful remained. They pressed their backs against the cold cavern walls, their glowing eyes darting through the shadows, searching for something, anything, that could explain what was happening. But the truth was clear now. The humans had not accepted the ritual of the eclipse because they were ignorant of the dangers. They had accepted because they knew they would win. When the last of the Varkari dropped their weapons and collapsed to their knees, trembling in the darkness they had once controlled, the humans finally revealed themselves. Stepping forward, unseen no longer, they stood over the defeated warriors, their expressions calm, almost amused. One of them knelt beside the Varkari leader, meeting his gaze through the dim bioluminescent glow. "You assumed we feared the dark," the human said softly. "Now you understand. The dark belongs to us too." The lesson had been taught, and the Valkyrie would never forget it. The moment the signal was given, the humans vanished into the darkness. The Valkyrie hunters, confident in their superiority, spread out through the vast underground tunnels of Varkosun, moving like shadows, their elongated limbs gliding silently over the rocky terrain. Their eyes, perfectly adapted to the eternal night, scanned the black void, searching for signs of movement. The game had always been the same. Outsiders tried to run, tried to hide, but the darkness always betrayed them. The Valkyrie had ruled this world for centuries, their vision sharper than any known species, their senses attuned to even the slightest vibration. No one had ever escaped them, and no one ever would. At least that was what they believed. But as the hunt began, something felt different. The tunnels, which had always been filled with the sounds of fleeing prey, hurried footsteps, rapid breathing, the faint rustle of clothing against stone, were eerily silent. The humans were not running. They were not panicking. They had simply disappeared. The Valkyrie moved cautiously, their instincts sharpened by years of hunting. They spread out, covering the area where the humans had last been seen. There were 5 of them, an insignificant number against the vast network of Valkyrie hunters. Yet there was no trace of them, no lingering scent, no disturbed dust, nothing to indicate where they had gone. One of the Valkyrie warriors, Scaris, flicked his tongue against the air, tasting for any sign of sweat, fear, or movement. But the tunnels carried only the familiar damp scent of the underground. He signaled to the others, clicking his claws against the stone, a code they had used for generations. Spread out, close the gaps, drive them into the open. The others obeyed, slipping into the shadows like wraiths, certain that their prey was merely hiding, waiting for a chance to escape. But the humans were not hiding. They were hunting. The first scream shattered the silence, a sharp guttural cry that echoed through the cavern. Every Valkyrie froze. Scaris turned his head sharply toward the sound, his eyes narrowing. The cry had come from one of their own. The hunters quickly repositioned themselves, moving toward the location of the disturbance. But when they arrived, there was nothing. No body, no weapon, only a faint, unsettling disturbance in the dust, as if something had been dragged away. Another cry followed, this time from the opposite side of the tunnel network. The Valkyrie turned, their movements more urgent now. This was impossible. Their prey should be running, not fighting back. The humans had no natural night vision, no biological advantage in the dark. And yet, their hunters were vanishing. Scaris felt the first flicker of unease crawl up his spine. The remaining Valkyrie pressed closer together, their instincts shifting from aggression to caution. They listened carefully, but the tunnels were betraying them. The humans moved without sound, without scent, appearing and disappearing as if they were part of the shadows themselves. It was unnatural. The Valkyrie had spent their entire existence believing they were the ultimate predators of the dark, but now the darkness felt different. It felt alive. Another warrior fell, yanked into the abyss before he could even scream. The remaining hunters turned wildly, trying to see through the suffocating blackness. Their leader, a seasoned warrior who had never known fear, let out a low guttural growl. "Show yourselves, cowards." A voice whispered back, from nowhere and everywhere at once. "You assumed we feared the dark." The word sent a chill through the Valkyrie ranks. It was impossible. The humans should have been struggling, terrified, disoriented. Instead, they were speaking, taunting. The realization hit like a hammer. The humans were not lost in the dark. They were moving through it with ease. The hunters had become the hunted. Panic spread among the remaining Valkyrie. Their training told them to retreat, regroup, analyze the threat. But there was no time. Another warrior fell, and then another. The humans did not attack with brute force. They struck with precision, taking down their enemies one by one, vanishing before the others could react. The Valkyrie, so used to being the masters of this world, were being dismantled by a species that should have been helpless. How? Scaris could not understand. The humans had arrived on this world needing lights to navigate, struggling against the darkness. But now, they moved like ghosts, adapting at an unnatural speed. The Valkyrie had always believed that light was the only thing that could conquer darkness, but the humans had proven them wrong. They did not need light. They had learned to own the night. In the final moments of the hunt, only a handful of Valkyrie remained. Their claws were drawn, their bodies tense, their senses stretched to their limits. But it did not matter. The humans had already won. One by one, the last hunters disappeared into the void, until only Scaris was left. He pressed his back against the cold cavern wall, his breath slow and controlled, trying to listen, trying to anticipate the final strike. He had never known fear, but now he understood it. The darkness no longer felt like home. It felt like a grave. And then, just before the end, he heard the final whisper, soft and mocking. The dark belongs to us too. The underground tunnels of Varco 7 were a place of endless darkness, a world where light had never existed, where shadows reigned supreme. The native Valkyrie hunters, creatures built for the night, had never known fear within these tunnels. Their sharp senses made them apex predators, their eyes able to see in total darkness, their hearing capable of detecting even the slightest movement. No species had ever dared to challenge them here, deep within the maze of rock and stone that had been their hunting ground for generations. But tonight, something was different. The humans had entered their domain, and the Valkyrie were prepared to remind them who ruled the darkness. They believed this would be like every other hunt, quick, effortless, and victorious. They were wrong. As the hunting party of 6 Valkyrie spread out, their long limbs moving with practiced grace, they listened for signs of their prey. Humans were weak in the dark, their vision useless, their movements clumsy. The hunt should have been simple. And yet, as they moved deeper into the tunnels, there was no sound of panicked footsteps, no frightened whispers or hurried breathing. There was only silence, an unnatural quiet that made even the Valkyrie uneasy. Scaris, the most experienced of the hunters, signaled for the others to halt. His tongue flicked against the air, tasting for any human scent. Nothing. He narrowed his eyes. The humans could not have simply vanished. They were here. They had to be. But where? A sudden shift in the air made him turn sharply, but there was nothing behind him, only shadows. His instincts screamed that something was wrong, but his pride refused to acknowledge it. They were the predators. Humans were the prey. And yet something deep inside him whispered that they had made a mistake. Then the first scream tore through the tunnels. It was one of their own. The Valkyrie spun around, claws bared, but the darkness revealed nothing. Their fallen comrade was gone, dragged into the abyss without a trace. The remaining hunters moved closer together, their confidence shaken. This was not how the hunt was supposed to go. The prey was supposed to run, to stumble, to make mistakes. But the humans were not running. They were waiting. Another hunter cried out, vanishing before the others could react. Panic set in. The Valkyrie turned wildly, trying to see what was happening, but the darkness that had always been their ally now felt like a trap. Scaris gritted his teeth, forcing himself to think. How? How could humans, creatures dependent on light, be doing this? It was impossible. Unless they had learned. The thought chilled him. Humans were known for their adaptability. They had survived in environments where no other species could. They were not the strongest, not the fastest, but they were something far worse, unpredictable. And now, it seemed, they had adapted to the darkness. Another Valkyrie fell, his body vanishing into the black void. The remaining 3 pressed their backs together, their breathing ragged. This was no longer a hunt. It was a slaughter, and for the first time in their lives, the Valkyrie understood what it meant to be prey. The silence was suffocating. They could hear their own heartbeats, feel the weight of the darkness pressing down on them. And then a whisper echoed through the tunnels. "You are not the only predators in the dark." The voice was human, but it carried no fear, only amusement, mockery. It came from nowhere and everywhere at once, a ghostly taunt that sent a shiver down Scaris's spine. He turned his head sharply, searching for the source, but the darkness refused to give up its secrets. His hands clenched into fists. This was not possible. Humans could not survive in this environment. They should have been lost, helpless. But instead, they had become something else. Another whisper followed, closer this time. "You have hunted for so long, but have you ever been hunted?" Scaris lashed out, his claws slashing through empty air. A chuckle answered him, low and knowing. The remaining hunters were trembling now, their fear a tangible thing. They had never known what it meant to be helpless, to be toyed with. Now they did. One of the last warriors bolted, abandoning the group, desperate to escape. He did not make it far. A sharp cry rang out, and then there was silence once more. Only two remained. Scaris's breathing was harsh, his mind racing. He had to think, had to understand. The humans were using their own tactics against them, separating them, disorienting them, striking without warning. They had turned the darkness into their weapon. The last Valkyrie beside him let out a growl of frustration and lunged into the void, determined to fight back. A mistake. He was gone in an instant. Now Scaris stood alone. The mighty hunter, the master of the underground, reduced to a frightened animal in the dark. He forced himself to remain still, listening, waiting. But there was nothing. No footsteps. No breathing. The humans were there. He knew they were there. But he could not see them, could not feel them. And that was the most terrifying thing of all. Then, finally, the darkness moved. A figure stepped forward, barely visible, a silhouette against the void. A human. Not afraid. Not lost. In control. Scaris tensed, ready for a final fight, but the human only tilted his head, as if studying him. And then he spoke. "Now you understand." The last thing Scaris saw was the glint of a blade before the darkness swallowed him whole. The battle was supposed to be over before it even began. The Trelvanni Dominion, a warlike empire that had crushed hundreds of civilizations under its rule, had never known failure. Their warriors were bred for combat, their warships were feared across the stars, and their strategies had been perfected over centuries. When they declared war on humanity, they had expected the same result as always: swift, decisive victory. They had seen the humans' numbers, analyzed their technology, studied their tactics. Everything pointed to an easy conquest. And yet, as the fleet commander, High Warlord Verash, watched the battlefield unfold before him, he felt something he had never known before. A cold, creeping sensation that curled around his mind like a vice. It was not rage, nor frustration. It was something far worse. Doubt. The battle had started as expected. The Dominion's warships outnumbered the human fleet 5-1. Their weapons were stronger, their defenses nearly impenetrable. The humans had positioned themselves near a gas giant, an apparent attempt to use the planet's magnetic field to mask their movements. A futile effort. The Trelvanni had seen such tricks before. With a single command, Verash had ordered his fleet forward, confident that this would be nothing more than another mark in the Dominion's long history of victories. But then, something changed. The humans did not retreat. They did not scatter in fear. They held their ground, their ships moving with an eerie precision that was unnatural for such a young species. And then, without warning, the Dominion's fleet started dying. Verash's eyes widened as he watched his warships implode one after another. The humans were too fast. Their ships, smaller and less armored, should not have been able to withstand the Dominion's firepower. And yet, they weaved through the battlefield with impossible agility, dodging attacks with an instinct that seemed almost unnatural. Their weapons, though weaker in theory, were striking in precise locations, bypassing shields, finding weaknesses that no enemy had ever exploited before. The Dominion's fleet, once an unstoppable force, was falling apart. "This is impossible," one of his sub-commanders growled, his mandibles clicking in frustration. "Their technology is inferior. Their numbers are insignificant. They should not be winning." And yet they were. The humans were not fighting like any enemy the Trelvani had faced before. They were not following predictable patterns. They were adapting, learning. Every move the Dominion made, the humans countered with terrifying efficiency. It was as if they had anticipated this battle long before it had even begun. A sudden explosion rocked the command deck as one of the Dominion's largest warships, the Crevath, was torn apart by a series of well-placed human strikes. The shockwave sent a ripple of panic through the crew. That ship alone had been capable of subjugating entire worlds, and now it was nothing more than debris floating in the void. Verash gritted his teeth, his mind racing. He had to regain control. He refused to believe that the Great Dominion could be defeated by mere humans. He barked orders, commanding the fleet to reform, to push forward, to crush the enemy with overwhelming force. But the humans did not let them. Every time the Trelvani regrouped, the humans struck from an unexpected angle, dismantling their formations with calculated brutality. And then, the most unthinkable thing happened. The flagship, his ship, was hit. Verash barely had time to react as alarms blared across the command deck. The hull was breached. Critical systems were failing. The humans had targeted the exact weak points necessary to cripple the ship's ability to maneuver. He staggered forward, gripping the console as he tried to process the unthinkable truth. They were losing. Panic spread through the Trelvani fleet. Some ships began to retreat, abandoning their positions in a desperate attempt to escape. But the humans gave no mercy. They pursued with relentless precision, cutting down the fleeing vessels one by one. The great Trelvani Dominion, undefeated for centuries, was being annihilated. Verash could not accept this. He would not. With the last of his strength, he opened a direct transmission to the human commander, desperate to understand how. How had they done this? How had they turned what should have been their extinction into the greatest defeat in Trelvani history? The screen flickered, and then the human appeared. A simple figure, clad in an unremarkable uniform, his expression calm and composed. But there was something in his eyes, something that sent a chill through Verash's entire being. Cold calculation. Not arrogance, not hatred, just the quiet certainty of a predator who had already won. "You want to know how?" the human said, tilting his head slightly. "How we beat you." He leaned closer, his voice steady. "You thought you were unstoppable. You thought your past victories made you invincible. But you forgot one thing." His lips curled into the smallest of smiles. "We learn, and we don't lose the same war twice." Verash's breath caught in his throat. He understood now. The Dominion had underestimated humans, just as they had underestimated countless species before. But humans were different. They did not fight for conquest. They fought for survival. And when a species fights for survival, they do not play by the rules of war. They change the rules entirely. The last thing Verash saw before his flagship was engulfed in flames was the human fleet closing in, their victory absolute. And for the first time in his life, he knew what it felt like to be on the losing side of history. The void was silent, cold, endless. It stretched in all directions, swallowing the light, the echoes of war, and the remnants of those who had dared to challenge it. The Xelvar High Command had always believed that no force could truly master the emptiness of space. They had fought dozens of wars, crushed resistance with superior firepower, and enslaved species that had dared to defy them. To them, war was a matter of numbers, of firepower, of overwhelming dominance. And yet, As Supreme Admiral Vorkash watched the battle unfold before him, he realized that they had made a fatal mistake. They had miscalculated. The humans had been a minor threat at first, a primitive species, barely beginning to expand beyond their home system. That Selvar had seen them as little more than an inconvenience, bold, yes, but hopelessly outmatched. They had assumed that a swift invasion would break them, that a show of strength would force them into submission. But the humans did not surrender. They did not break. They disappeared. Vorkash had expected open combat. He had deployed his fleet in a standard formation, prepared for direct engagement. But instead of facing their enemy head-on, the humans had faded into the darkness of the void, using the emptiness of space as their ally. They had shut down their signals, hidden their movements, and turned the battlefield into a vast, silent graveyard. And now, one by one, the Selvar ships were vanishing. The admiral clenched his jaw as another explosion rippled across the vastness of space, marking the death of yet another warship. The enemy was unseen, but the devastation was undeniable. One moment, a ship would be intact, its weapons locked and ready, its crew alert. The next, it would be torn apart by unseen forces, its wreckage drifting lifelessly in the void. "They are ghosts," one of his officers whispered, his voice filled with barely contained fear. "We cannot see them. We cannot hear them. They strike and then vanish." Vorkash refused to believe it. He was a warrior of the Selvar dominion, a commander of fleets that had burned entire civilizations to ash. And yet, as he stood on the bridge of his flagship, scanning the darkness for an enemy that refused to reveal itself, he felt something unfamiliar gnawing at the edges of his mind. Dread. The humans had turned the battlefield into a lesson, a brutal, unforgiving lesson in the nature of the void. It did not belong to the strongest. It belonged to those who could master it. And humanity, against all expectations, had become its true predator. Every attempt to track them had failed. The Selvar's advanced sensors, designed to detect even the faintest of signals, had been rendered useless. The humans were using the void itself as a weapon, manipulating gravity fields, using debris as cover, striking only when their victory was assured. They never wasted ammunition. They never revealed themselves unnecessarily. Every shot they fired was precise, every ambush planned to perfection. And the Selvar, for all their power, were helpless against an enemy they could not see. A new alarm blared across the command deck, and Vorkash turned just in time to see another warship erupt into flames. The screams of its crew echoed through the comms for only a second before being cut short. He gritted his teeth. Pull back. Regroup near the central beacon. If they want to fight in the dark, we will burn away the shadows. It was a desperate move, but it was all they had left. The remaining Selvar ships formed a tight formation, their energy weapons firing indiscriminately into the void, attempting to flush the humans out. Massive bursts of plasma lit up the darkness, pushing back against the endless black. But the humans did not take the bait. They simply waited. And then, when the Selvar weapons had overheated, when their ships had expended too much energy in their blind assault, the humans struck again. Faster, deadlier, unstoppable. Vorkash's heart pounded as he watched the massacre unfold in real time. His fleet was dying. The great warships of the Selvar dominion, once symbols of terror and supremacy, were being dismantled with eerie precision. It was not just a defeat, it was a lesson. The comms crackled, and for the first time in the entire battle, a human voice came through. Cold, controlled, patient. "You thought the void would hide you from us," the voice said, calm and measured. "But we do not fear the dark. We are the ones who hunt in it." Vorkash clenched his fists, rage and helplessness burning in his chest. He had never known true defeat until this moment. He had never imagined that a lesser species could bring the Dominion to its knees. But now, as the last of his ships crumbled around him, as the darkness of the void swallowed him whole, he understood. This was humanity's battlefield, and they had just taught the galaxy its most brutal lesson.